bunch of you with us, so thank you so much for being here. The structure of this event will first be an introduction, then we'll have a conversation with our author, and lastly, some time to take questions or comments. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to type in your concern in the chat box and I'll assist you there. To ask a question, make a comment, you can raise your hand at any time. We'll unmute you or put it in the Q&A box or chat box and we'll address them at the appropriate time. Okay, well, let's first with the introduction to your book. Abandoned New Mexico, Ghost Towns, Endangered Architecture, and Hidden History encompasses huge swaths of time and space. As rural populations decline and young people move to ever larger cities, much of our past is left behind. Out on the plains or along now quiet highways, changes in the modes of livelihood and transportation have moved only in one direction. Stately homes and hand-built schools, churches, and bars, these are not just stuff of individual lives, but of an entire culture. New Mexico, among the least dense states in the country, was crossed by both the Spanish and Route 66. The railroads stretched toward every hopeful mine, and outlaws died in its arms. Its pueblos are among the oldest human habitations in the U.S., and the first atomic bomb was detonated nearly dead in its center. John Mulhouse spent almost a decade documenting the forgotten corners of a state like no other through his popular City of Dust project. From the sunbaked Chihuahuan Desert to the snow-capped Moreno Valley, travel through John's words and pictures across the legendary Land of Enchantment. John Mulhouse started the City of Dust blog in 2004, dedicated to photo documentation of the numerous derelict historic buildings and abandoned places along the Georgia-South Carolina border. Following a move to New Mexico in 2009, City of Dust began to explore the history of entire towns, rural places often forgotten by all but those who still live there and love them. Largely using film and a New Mexico atlas and gazetteer, he has collected thousands of images on the state's past as seen from the present. He remains a hunter of ghost towns, empty houses, endless ribbons of asphalt, and more. Please welcome John and his book, Abandoned New Mexico.
Thank you, Jessica. That was fantastic. And I know you've been doing a lot of these lately, so thank you for, you said almost 50 of these Zoom meetings. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you, John. So, okay, I kind of already touched on it, but how long have you been visiting and documenting abandoned sites? What started your journey to document abandoned places, and what attracts you to visit and document abandoned places?
Well, I started in Georgia in about 2003. I visited an old farmhouse on my bike rides, and the farmhouse was eventually torn down. And I really regretted that I hadn't documented it. It was torn down for a subdivision, of course. And it was a beautiful old farmhouse. And so that kind of began my urge to document old buildings. And when I was living in Augusta, Georgia in particular, there's just a lot of old buildings. I'm from Minnesota originally. And by old, I mean early 1800s, even a building from 1799 that was derelict. And being from Minnesota, I just never saw that kind of age in buildings, let alone derelict buildings. You know, the winter in Minnesota just destroys everything. So I was fascinated. I found them beautiful. And I also sort of, at the time I was in graduate school, I was worn out like most graduate students are, and they kind of resonated with me. I thought, oh, look at this sort of majestic but bedraggled building. I kind of understand what this building kind of feels like, perhaps. So that's why I started to take the photos. I'd never owned a camera before I started taking pictures of abandoned buildings. And I started with plastic disposable cameras. And I still use film to this day. I also use digital and other things, but I still like to use film. And, you know, when I think back, even as a kid, I was sort of attracted to abandoned places. I remember going into an old bar by my house. They were going to expand the highway, and so this bar was slated for demolition. And we snuck in there, and I was fascinated. So I guess you know, even though things really started in Georgia and really ramped up in New Mexico, where I could, you know, find entire towns to explore, I guess it really goes back even farther than that, to when I was probably a little kid.
That's awesome. So what exactly makes a ghost town a ghost town?
That's a pretty important question, actually, because a ghost town is typically not a place with no people at all. It's pretty rare to find a place that's uninhabited. They do exist, of course, but really a ghost town, for the definition that, you know, ghost town aficionados use, it's really a place that has substantially decreased in population from its peak. And typically the reason for its existence or its founding is gone, whether that's mining or, you know, Route 66 travel or, agriculture, things of that nature, the railroad. The reason that it started to grow in the first place has come and gone. So you could actually say that Detroit might be a ghost town, but you know a ghost town when you're in it. You can say, well, this feels like a ghost town.
For those who may still be living in a ghost town, do they kind of resent that title of it, or do they embrace that they live in a ghost town?
Well, that's exactly why it's important to kind of put that definition out there, so that people that live in these places don't say, hey, but I'm here, it's not a ghost town. And so that's true. And some people do embrace it. They say, I'm the last person here, or there's just 4 of us here, and we love it, and it's a ghost town, and you know, we have to drive an hour to get to the grocery store, and that's what we love. And then some people are a little less thrilled with having the place they live called a ghost town. So it varies, for sure. And I'm very sensitive to that as well, I hope.
Yeah, I'm sure you've had to be in your investigating. So how difficult is it to track down information and history about abandoned buildings or towns? What kind of research do you have to do, and how do you discover the information on sites you've documented?
Well, it actually turns out to be pretty easy, particularly because New Mexico has a lot of ghost town books that have come out through the years. And in fact, I happen to have one right next to me, one of my favorites, which is Philip Varney's New Mexico's Best Ghost Towns. This came out in about 1980. It's still a fantastic reference. It's got maps. You know, you look at the pictures and you're like, wow, I wish it looked like this now. But it's still a great reference. There's some other ones that have come out more recently, like Linda Harris's Ghost Towns Alive. So these are really great references. But I also recommend just driving around in New Mexico, just getting in the car and just looking for, you know, locations that maybe aren't in these books, or maybe someone has mentioned. Like there's a place called the Porticito Trading Post that was really hard to find. It doesn't show up in these books really. It was associated with the Berlin train robbery. The robbers actually stopped at this trading post briefly to have some wine and sardines or something like that. And it was really hard to find. And there's a certain satisfaction. We had to go there twice to actually find the remains of the trading post. But there is a certain satisfaction in not using the books and just going out there and just seeing what you can see. And sometimes having to work backwards, saying, well, what was that place that we found? And then you can kind of dig into your books or ask people. And I recommend that way too. That's a good method.
Thank you. I'm going to mispronounce your name, and I apologize for that. Georgelin. I'm going to allow you to talk. You can ask your question.
Yes. I have been doing some research on abandoned places because I like that too, so that's why I'm here. And I have read that Gary, Indiana is now a ghost town because the population dropped from 178,000 to 78,000. And so many buildings are abandoned and crumbling that people consider Gary, Indiana now a ghost town because US Steel left.
Yeah, and it does fit the definition. It definitely does. And I've seen a lot of photos from Gary recently where it does look like large parts of the city are fairly derelict because, like you said, the steel industry has really left entirely. So yeah, it does fit that definition.
I think Detroit would probably be upset if you called them a ghost town. Probably Gary would be too, but
Yeah, and I know people in Detroit in particular are really tired of people coming to their city to photograph the Book Cadillac Hotel and some of the other structures that are well known to be abandoned and derelict right now. So it does require a lot of sensitivity to discuss this kind of stuff and to actually go out there and explore it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Linda has a good question. What about trespassing concerns?
Trespassing is a big issue. And actually the very first slide that I have, we'll show some slides here, is actually kind of getting at that point. And it's really best to stay on the public spaces and the public right-of-ways. Occasionally, and actually more often than one might expect, someone will come out and talk to you. And then if that's the case, then you can sort of start to explore other places. Like in Mills, I was there and I met, I think, maybe postmistress. Someone was at the post office and she said, you know what, you're fine to go out and photograph these places and you'll be okay. That's the ideal. That's really what you want, is to meet someone, interact with them, have them be welcoming and friendly. And if you know some of the history of these places, if you know what happened there, if you know some of the family names even, then that will be very helpful. And then I really recommend that as the best way, is to kind of try to talk to somebody. And if you can't, then you can take plenty of shots from the side of the highway. Like in Yeso, I'll show some photos that I took from the side of the road. And also just for personal safety, a lot of these places are falling down fast, and a lot of them are adobe. And so it is best to err on the side of caution for sure.
Thank you. So this is probably a good point to start sharing, because Graham asked, are you going to show photos of some of your discoveries? And
yeah, let's see if I can pull this off here. We'll share screen. All right, can you see that? Is that working?
Perfect.
All right, so this is Cabazon in Sandoval County. It is a fantastic ghost town. It is right in the shadow of Cabazon Peak. It was in The Hired Hand, which I believe that's a Peter Fonda movie, but it's a great film, and it shows up in that movie. It is entirely fenced off. There's one person who lives there. In order to get access to it, you really need to make contact with him, which for us took a couple different phone calls through a couple different people. And even then, I don't think he was super happy to have us out there for the length of time we were out there. But you otherwise can't get there. It's the road is fenced off. And so it is. I've had a number of people ask me how to visit, and you really can't unless you make some contact with some people. On the other hand, Guadalupe, which is a ghost town also in this area in the Rio Puerco Valley of Sandoval County, is a few miles to the west, and the folks there have been fine with me being out there taking photos of the old dance hall that's still standing, a 2-story adobe, some of the other structures. A lot of it's falling down quick, but they're more than happy to have folks out there taking some photos. So that's like sort of an example of two extremes, both within a few miles of each other, really. And of course, the people that live in each place know each other, so you can drop some names back and forth too. And then, see if I can get this to work. So this is just an example of an early photo I took. This is probably one of the first 5 or 6 photos I took in the state of New Mexico. This was actually on a trip before I lived there in 2005. This is the old bank in Springer. And coincidentally, I now know the person who has purchased this structure all these years later. He's restored it and is going to live in it. So sort of an interesting lineage there. I sent this photo to him and said, this is one of the very first photos I took when I came to the state on my first trip. And so I'm hoping to go and visit him and see what he's done to the place. But some of these places do get purchased and rehabbed. I wouldn't have thought this would be one, but it has been. This is Yeso, the place I was talking about, one of my favorite ghost towns. It actually shows up in, I want to say, Outside magazine. I might have that wrong. Sam Gilbert wrote a piece on it because it's such a great ghost town, fairly intact. And you can take a lot of photos just from right off Highway 60. This is on your way to Clovis, actually. And there's a photo from the right of way. Great picture of the old Hotel Mesa. And you can see a museum is misspelled there, the Frontier Museum. I love that. But this is a gem. And so I always mention this as sort of a ghost town that people can go to and can walk up and down the highway and take some great photos. And Sam wrote this piece because there is anywhere between 1 to 3 people that are there at any given time, I think. So it's not entirely a ghost town, but it's definitely getting there. I'll do one more of these. This is the Albuquerque rail yards. Obviously not a ghost town, but it's like a little town within the city of Albuquerque. I don't know if people have been there. Hopefully some people have gone to the rail yard markets. A good example of a place that has been repurposed to a degree, but everybody would love to see something done with this historic place. It's kind of, the railroad is kind of why Albuquerque is where it is. And this was the heart of the railroad activity in Albuquerque. And even though this has stopped functioning, obviously Albuquerque is nowhere near being a ghost town. So I guess in this case, it's a little bit of a turnabout where the railroad played such a key role in Albuquerque, and even though it doesn't play that role anymore, Albuquerque has persisted. So I'll stop for now right there.
Thanks for sharing those. So this question ties pretty well into what you were talking about. Heather asks, concerning the definition of a ghost town, what if the original reason for its existence changed, like it was a railroad town and now it's tourism that keeps it alive? Would it still be considered a ghost town?
That is a great question. And I think that might actually depend on what the town prefers. So a place like Chloride, I think that they're more than happy to consider themselves a ghost town, more or less for tourist purposes, to get people to come out and see the fantastic museum out there, and to maybe even spend the night. And then a place like Madrid, which really, the pictures for Madrid in the 60s and 50s are incredible. I mean, it really was a mining ghost town, and clearly now it's not. And now that we're talking about it, I'm not sure if Madrid actually refers to themselves as a former ghost town or a current ghost town, or if they just refer to themselves as sort of a quirky art community a little bit south of Santa Fe. I'm actually not sure. So that might depend a little bit on how people want to define themselves. But I actually do consider Madrid to be in the ghost town family, even though it's kind of bustling now.
So on that same note, from all the sites you've visited, what are the most common factors that may have made for the town becoming a ghost town?
Yeah, and that's in New Mexico. New Mexico is really great for ghost town hunters because there are a few different reasons that kind of happen in New Mexico and don't happen in every state. They don't all happen in every state. So you do have the railroad, especially out on the eastern plains that came through the Belen Cutoff. Trains had to stop and take on water. With the switch to diesel, they didn't have to do that anymore. And they typically started to just kind of chug right through places like Yeso and Negra and some other places along Highway 60 in particular. So there's a lot of ghost towns along the Belen Cutoff. Route 66, huge as far as creating ghost towns, whether it's Cuervo or, parts of San Juan, and then out, even when you're driving to Grants and to Gallup, if you stay on 66, you'll go places, San Fidel, that are essentially ghost towns along Route 66. And then agriculture is another one. Some of the agriculture has not been able to persist in the state due to drought. The drought in the 50s was really traumatic for a lot of agricultural areas. So there's agricultural ghost towns, and then there's, of course, mining ghost towns. The Southwest has a ton, Kingston, Hillsboro, Fierro, Hanover, Mogollon, just a lot of places that, boomed with the mines and then quickly kind of kind of became ghosts, over the next few decades.
Are there sites that you were never able to find any information about? How does it make you feel about abandoned sites that you've never been able to document in this fashion you would wish?
Yeah, there was one in particular that for a long time, it's in the book, it's Center Point, which is sort of in the middle of New Mexico, hence the name. But for a long time, I couldn't figure out what it was, why it was there. There was just a schoolhouse. So obviously, if there was a school, there was a community there. But I couldn't find anything about it. It's on Highway 55 south of Mountain Air. And then finally, like, somebody contacted me and said, my mom was a teacher there, and I spent a couple of years there as a young child, and this was what was going on in the area, and it was called Center Point. And so I learned all these great things. And with the internet and the City of Dust Facebook page and things like that, I typically get information now. Like if there's a place that I don't know anything about, I can put a picture up and someone's gonna tell me something about it. Sometimes what they say isn't quite right, but it usually starts the journey. But I can't imagine, how Varney pulled it off back in the 70s, just trying to, collect stuff from people he talked to on the sides of the road and things like that. So usually I can track stuff down now, but there are buildings where I'm like, I just don't know what that was, and I'd love to know. So hopefully over time I'll get more information on those few places.
Thank you. So you mentioned how a lot of these abandoned sites can be dangerous, hazardous, or you're trespassing on people's property. What are some of the risks and rewards when visiting abandoned sites, and what has been the most risky encounter you may have had?
Well, I will say that in New Mexico, people are really pretty friendly. I have not had many problems. I've had other problems when I was in Augusta in South Carolina. But in New Mexico, everyone has been willing to at least hear me out, willing to, have a conversation with me. And, sometimes they're still like, all right, move along. But usually, even in those cases, it's led to more stories or more conversations. And so in terms of the risks, I think the risks are really just things like stepping on a nail or, hitting your head on something. As we said, you really want to stay away from trespassing. And I think there's an idea that when you go to abandoned places, there's going to be like a lot of nefarious behavior. You're going to see evidence of, stuff that's unsavory or whatever. And that's really only happened at Cuervo a number of years ago, where there was some evidence of unsavory activity and ended up being on KRQE at one point. This was, I think, in 2013. So it's been a long time. And the last time I was through Cuervo, the gas station, which was a few weeks ago, actually, the gas station was open again. There were some people there. They had put up no parking signs along the side of the old abandoned side of Route 66 on the east side of the south side of I-40. So they're definitely trying to keep people out, but there was also more activity. So hopefully that's a place that's, opening up a little bit. And like I said, that was 7 years ago. So a lot has changed, but those are, the risks are really just encountering people that don't want you there and having to figure out a way to navigate that. And sometimes just get in the car and leave. And the rewards are also sort of the same. The biggest rewards are talking to the people that you meet that are able to say, this is the ice house that my family owned and now I own it. This is actually a conversation I had with someone that wanted me to leave the place that I was visiting, and they were like telling me about some of the the old Model T shop that was still standing across the street, and they own the ice house. And so they went into this big sort of discussion of their family history in the area after they told me, would you please get out of here? We don't want you here. So New Mexico has been very good to me.
This is along the same lines, but I gotta say, sometimes I fantasize about running away to live in a nowhere kind of place. Going from Santa Fe to Roswell, I like to stop at the diner in Vaughn and just
Mhm.
space out and imagine what it'd be like to live in nowhere. So generally, what are folks like who remain living in ghost towns? Were they born and raised there? Do they move there for a reason? Such as the 124 people that live in Hillsborough. What are folks like in ghost towns?
It varies quite a bit. So there are definitely people that are in ghost towns just because they want to be away from everybody. Some people have moved there. Some people have kind of gotten marooned there, and they're just staying there because they kind of want to be off on their own, away from people. And then there are definitely a lot of people that have a strong family history to these places. That's maybe the largest category, is people that, generations of their family have either lived in the same place or have lived in the area or have been ranching in the area. And they know everybody and everybody knows them. And that's, I think, probably the largest category. And then a place like Hillsborough, um, Hillsborough attracts, I think, I don't know if retirees is the word, but definitely people that just, it's a comfortable place to be. I think it's a beautiful place to be. Um, there are a couple, you can go to the cafe and get breakfast and hang out with everybody. And I think kind of like Madrid, um, it's a nice place to spend time. And so I think there's that element as well.
Um, Gerard has a good question I didn't think about. Have drones been helpful in your quest?
I have not used drones myself. And in fact, I've only had one drone encounter that was really spooky. So just investigate, this was in Arizona, going to the Painted Desert trading post, and this drone just came out of nowhere and started flying over us. And at first we didn't know what it was. It just was coming at us. We're like, what is this thing? Like, oh, it's a drone. And it just kind of hovered above us, and we had permission to be there, or at least we knew someone who told us we had permission to be there. And then the drone just left. So we decided it was someone from a local ranch who just wanted to make sure we weren't up to no good. But drones would be very helpful for some places that, you're just like, well, I don't know if I want to hike all the way up that mountain just to see if the remains of this, encampment are there. So I haven't used them personally, but it's an interesting question.
I'm going to allow you to talk again, Derjelin. Maybe unmuted and ask.
Are we going to see more pictures?
I was just about to say, maybe we'll show some more pictures. All right, let's go to pictures. All right, so speaking of mining, this is Kelly, which is a true ghost town. There is nobody living in Kelly. Of course, there are people in Magdalena, which is literally just, a handful of feet down the road. This is a good example of a place that's actually pretty dangerous. That head frame, the shaft is wide open. I mean, there's some hurricane fencing or barbed wire around it, depending on when you go. But it's a pretty dangerous place, and there's some mines in some caves nearby too. So definitely some of the hazards, but also a good example of a place where there's nobody there, and there's not much in the way of structures. They, as far as I know, they moved to the town, so you can see some great pictures of the town just before it shut down, with all the houses and buildings along the roads. The church is still there and maintained, and I think there might be one person that kind of lives at least on the outskirts of Kelly, in the suburbs, if you want to call it that. But yeah, this is really a great place, especially when the sun is going down there in the Magdalena Mountains. This is Lake Valley, which is a great place to go visit, another mining town. This is where the Bridal Chamber silver mine, the very famous silver mine, one of the most famous in the world, they hauled millions of dollars out of that. This is taken from the cemetery, and I always recommend going to visit the cemeteries because, you can see what are obviously some sad stories, people that die very close together in families, and, tuberculosis and pandemics, things that were coming through these areas, and make it clear that this was really a tough way of life. It's easy to romanticize it, and I do that as well, but it was difficult to live down in southern New Mexico at this time and be a miner. You can see the school in the background. That's the big building to the right, and the town itself to the left. This is run by the Bureau of Land Management. Nobody's living there, but you can go and visit. You can go into the school, which is where the museum is. They'll give you a little tour. So this is a great one to go and visit as well. This is a new one from a couple of weeks ago, a place that I've been trying to get to for a while. This is the Cedar Hill grocery and filling station, and it's on Route 66 near Tucumcari in Quay County. It's kind of fun because that roof is made of hammered oil cans. So good rural ingenuity. Just whenever you need to keep patching your roof, just hammer out some oil cans and put them up there, and they're still there. So clearly it did the job. Another Route 66 shot. I just got off Route 66, so it's kind of on my mind. This, of course, is a place that's no longer open. So it's a good example. It's not a ghost town, but it's La Bajada, the old Route 66 drive down from Santa Fe, no longer open to the public, but a good example of, looking at our past and something that created ghost towns, Route 66, through a lot of New Mexico. This is Conch. This is actually a WPA school. So schools are one of the most common ruins that I come across, and often WPA. There's one in Monticello. There's this one in Conch. There's another one that we'll see on the next slide. Conch is the village that was in the fallout path of the Trinity test. So when I mentioned that on the book blurb, it's Conch that was right in the prevailing wind. So a lot of big history in some of these ghost towns. This was a town that was impacted by the detonation of the first atom bomb. A lot of people have contacted me and said that they got cancer growing up after spending their childhood there, or their family got cancer. So really some very intense and important history in a lot of these ghost towns, which you might not guess at first glance. Here's another fantastic school. This is Amistad, 1937, clearly. This is a place that a lot of people have contacted me about with fond memories. And in fact, I would say that from the messages I get, probably 95% of what I get are really fond memories of these places. And of course, a lot of wistfulness, sort of a lot of sadness, thinking back, this is where I went to school and this is what it looks like now. So there is a lot of bittersweet feelings about these places, but definitely overwhelmingly fond memories of these towns. This is my favorite abandoned building. It is owned, it's not abandoned technically, but my favorite sort of empty building in New Mexico, the First Presbyterian Church of Taiban. It was built in 1908. This was a place that I knew about before I got there. I'd been wanting to go and visit it when I first moved to New Mexico, and I think it took a couple of years to get there actually. But I photographed this now many, many times. It's just a place where, for whatever reason, especially in the evenings when the wind picks up, it just feels really nice. It's just a really gentle, charming place to be. Sadly, every time I'm there, the church is looking a little rougher. A little more has fallen off, or something else has fallen down. So I'm rooting for it, but I know that time is an inevitable force in some cases. So yeah, we can come back to a few more of these. We'll make sure to save time. I got maybe 5 or 10 more to go through.
We have a couple questions here. Chris asks, what are your thoughts on the state of Raton, which some see as a growing ghost town?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've formed an opinion on Raton. I hope that it is able to grow. I've spent a little time there. I know that, I guess this is a good example of a place that the interstate has impacted to a really large degree. So I think, you know, the fast food chains and the chain hotels along the interstate are one thing. Hopefully that fantastic downtown area can start to see some of that money coming their way. I think that would make a big difference for Raton.
Kelly asks, when you go exploring, do you go with a group or companion? Have you ever camped out overnight?
I tend to not go alone. I've only gone alone a couple times. Typically it's been with one or two other people, so not very big groups. Big groups are, I think, would be a little bit of, I don't know, maybe a little bit of trouble. This way, you know, you kind of know everybody is, you kind of know everyone's going to be respectful, you know what everybody is coming into the situation with in terms of what they want to get out of it. And they're not going to walk off with, you know, souvenirs and what have you. As far as spending the night in one, I've never spent the night in like an actual ghost town. Like the New Mexico Jeep tours did overnights at Cabazon for a while, and I would have loved to have done that. I don't know if they still do that, but that would have been a lot of fun. I've spent the night in places that are sort of, well, in hotels that are sort of ghost towny, like the St. James in Cimarron, of course. But yeah, I haven't actually camped out in a ghost town, which would be interesting. I wouldn't be against that.
Gerard asks, are most of these locations accessible by a standard car, or do you need an SUV?
I would say 80% to 85% are accessible by a standard car. Most of the time, you're not going too far off a paved road if you're going off a paved road at all. Some of the places that are difficult to get to, like Guadalupe, that can be a really dicey road, especially after a rain. Riley, which is Santa Rita as well, has Santa Rita is the earlier name. That's a really tough one to get to if you don't have a good four-wheel drive vehicle. But for the most part, you know, you can see a lot with a passenger car. In fact, I have a friend, we went out and used her minivan a lot. So you can see a lot with a minivan.
Cool. Phil asks, I might mispronounce this, is the Delorme Atlas the best source of maps of the state's back roads? Are there other sources you'd recommend?
I'm going to go ahead and say yes. I love the Delorme Atlas. It gives you, you know, two-track roads, stuff that you don't really see easily in other sources. It also gives you property ownership, which can be useful. You know, you can say like, well, I can see that based on this map, I'm on state land or I'm on county land or something like that. That can be helpful. And I don't know of anything that trumps it. I take it with me whenever I go. Obviously, you know, you can use phone GPS. That's great. I would recommend that too. But for just having something on your lap and looking for where you are and where you're going and what your options are, kind of seeing the lay of the land, I love that map. Otherwise, you know, Varney's book has some nice maps in it as well. And I should say that my map, I was going to have a map in my book. It got left out for reasons I don't quite know. If you want a map, if you want a copy of my mock-up of the map, you can email me and I'll send you a copy. You can put it in your book. I don't quite know what happened there, but someday I'll ask the publisher.
Thank you. This is a comment from Phil, which is cool. Thanks for sharing, Phil. The conservation group Albuquerque Wildlife Federation visits sites of ghost towns every year to conduct ecological restoration projects, including Cibola near Grants, Midnight near Cuesta, and Loma Parda within the Rio Moro National Wildlife Refuge. Thanks for sharing that, Phil.
Yeah, that's great. Loma Parda would be a great place to do some restoration work. That's fantastic. I'm actually a botanist by training, so I don't know how that's gotten past me, but I'm glad to know about it. Thanks. Patricia
says, how do you feel about ghost towns that have been repainted and repurposed? I visited Mogollon Growing up in the 50s, when I returned in the 1990s, buildings had been redone and repainted. I felt like it had lost something. I felt like I was no longer able to time travel into the past.
Yeah, that is a difficult question for me to answer because I'm of a couple different minds about it. I agree, particularly from trying to get the ambiance and to take photos and to document it. You know, what I like patinas, I like, you know, chipped paint, I like all that kind of stuff. I do realize that, you know, that means that the process of decay is happening and is underway. And so I do feel like sometimes, like chloride's a good example, like, again, they've managed to kind of, you know, shore some of that stuff up. They've repainted some things. Mugione, I know exactly what they're talking about. It definitely has been given a couple coats of paint here and there. I agree, and I also think, you know what, you know, if someone was to come in and fix up the Taiban church and paint it, I'd be like, oh, it's just, I'm not going to be able to photograph it the way I want to, but I'd be like, I'm glad that, you know, someone has come in and made this thing live for, you know, the next few decades or whatever. Someone asked about my email. I'll have that at the end. That's on the last slide. So thanks.
So another question here. I'm curious to know why you use film instead of digital.
That is a great question. I asked myself that question actually, because I do sometimes use expired film and then I get the prints back and, you know, for whatever reason, they're fogged or, you know, the exposure is off or something like that. There are two answers. One is just that I don't like to take many pictures. I don't like to, you know, have to come home and post-process 300 images. I like to just shoot one or two. If I take two, then I'm feeling like I'm wasting money and I'm wasting, you know, I don't develop my own film, so I got to pay for it. So that I feel like keeps me focused on the experience and not on the photo taking. And then maybe I'm imagining it, but I feel like when I look at some of my film photos that they have something that I can't replicate digitally. I mean, I could post-process. I know there's a lot of different techniques, but sometimes I just feel like maybe because I'm in a ghost town and I'm using the old technology, something's working with me. I'm getting a little bit of assistance from the spirits of the ghost towns, but I also like vinyl records. So maybe it's just me being difficult and using the old ways.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I also like vinyl and holding a real camera. Andrea, you are welcome to ask your question.
Oh, thank you. My question was about the email, but I just wanted to comment that John, you're a hunter, and part of the reason you may want to use film is also it correlates with the times. Film came out of the 1800s, so it seems that you're a man of that time. Also, I wanted to tell you about an ice house, because you mentioned ice houses, and it's not in New Mexico, but there is a magical ice house in Savannah, Georgia. And I have the contact, and the artist who owns it has sculptures in it. His name is Jerome Meadows, and I would be glad to put you in touch with it. There are canals under the ice house and windows with vines growing in, and it's something out of the movies.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to know about that. So if you could send me an email,
I will.
And send me the information. That's kind of my old stomping grounds a little bit. So I'm actually trying to get back there in the next few months. So that would be great to put on my list of things to visit.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the film. Maybe there is just something that resonates with that time period. Maybe this is a good time to show some more photos.
Yes.
This is a good example of, you know, looking at something from the past and almost not being able to place it. Like, it's hard for me to imagine when Taiban looked like this. I'm not even sure where along the streets of Taiban this would have been. This is from a book called High Plains History, which I don't own. It's really difficult to find. Speaking of sources of information, High Plains history is really hard to find, and a Torrance County history is really hard to find. So if anybody out there finds a copy at your local garage sale, keep me in mind. High Plains history has a great leather cover as well. So I do like to look at these and just kind of wonder at the past and the transformation that's happened. There's some great old photos of the Taiban church through the years as well. Some with, there's an airplane in the foreground of one of them, because there was a landing strip nearby. So really great historic photos in some parts of New Mexico. This is a good example of the film that we were talking about. So this is the San Jose Mission in Santa Casia down in Socorro County, often flooded by the Rio Grande. And this is taken with extremely cheap 120 millimeter film, about as cheap as you can get. And so that gives it, you know, some really interesting effects, which I love. This camera is a plastic, it's called a Woka. You can't really do much of anything except snap the shutter. It has like a little knob. It has a picture of a sun and a picture of some clouds, and you just turn that depending on what time or what you think the weather conditions are. And it's uncontrollable. And I get pictures that I can't do anything with. And then I get pictures that I love, like this one. And I just, yeah, there's something about the film technology and the uncertainty of film as well. I think I like that for reasons I'm not, you know, not sure about. But yeah, I love that little camera. This is a good example of a place that I didn't know anything about. And when I posted on Facebook, I learned all kinds of stuff. It's the Harrison family house in Encino, Torrance County, also off of Highway 60. Highway 60 is a great place, especially the sections east of I-25 all the way to the Texas border. But there's some interesting stuff to the west. You go through Pie Town and some other great stuff. I didn't know anything about this house. I got a message from Jerry Harrison, who was the person who grew up here. He said that they had a 5-seater outhouse because they had 12 kids. He's like, just imagine having 12 kids in that place. I think he said not all 12 were there at the same time. I'd never heard of a 5-seater outhouse. So those are great stories. Someone has taken the door. Well, the house is now collapsed, sadly. And just before it collapsed, someone took the door. And I was told they rescued the door, which I hope is the case. They found new life for it. But yeah, this was one that over the years, I just watched it tumbling down, and it's totally collapsed now. This is, well, it says Amistad. I must have cut and pasted wrong. This is Mills. This is actually the place where I said someone, the person at the post office said, you feel free to go out and walk around and take pictures of the houses. So this is one of the houses that I took a picture of because she said I could. A great little place, not too far from Mills Valley. Really, really evocative. This is a digital shot, actually. Might as well point that out. This is Roy in Hardin County. Hardin County is huge. I want to say there's just one functioning gas station, which is in Roy, and then there's a couple places to eat. But for a county that size, there's a lot of open land. This is an example of a place I didn't know existed. We were just driving around. We could see it kind of rise over the highway. We're like, what is this? Let's go out there and find it. It's a convent, Catholic convent that was built in 1895, and I believe it closed in 1970. It's just an incredible old building, and it's one of those things that on a day when you're not expecting it to come across a place like this is really makes it all worth it. It really is great not to have everything planned when you go out there. Leave a lot of space in your itinerary to find things that you weren't looking for, because you'll find them for sure. Speaking of finding things, you want to find them quickly, because this is Colfax in Colfax County, not too far from Cimarron. I got there days after. You can see the burn marks. I believe the property owner was concerned that the remaining buildings were liability issues, and so they had just burned them all down. So this is Varney's picture. Obviously, this is from 1970 something, but you can see some of the structures were still there. I think that that rail car in the foreground may have been where this area was, but everything is gone except for some of the brick ruins that I think was a hotel. But a lot of this stuff is going fast, so it really does pay to get out there and see it now. This is Madrid, which we were talking about. I put this in here because this is an example of what all the houses looked like in Madrid, maybe in 1969 or something like that, when the hippies started to move out there. And this, I think, is maybe the only one left in this condition. Everybody else is kind of got their homes looking all fancy and rehab. But I'm glad this one is still there. A little bit of the old style. This is my favorite set of petroglyphs in New Mexico. And I just put this in there because I feel like ghost towns really aren't anything new. You know, the things that have been left behind, particularly in New Mexico, don't just go back to the 1800s. Like when I was in Minnesota, I always thought, wow, 18 something, that's old. I mean, we're going back hundreds, thousands of years in New Mexico, and there's Chaco Canyon is a ghost town, really. So I'm fascinated by all sorts of the things that have been left behind by the people that have come before us. I only have one more slide that maybe I'll save till the end because it has my email on it, and people can write that down.
Someone asks, have you been to Animus Forks, Colorado?
I have not. Sadly, I haven't been to a whole lot of ghost towns in Colorado, unfortunately. So Varney wrote a book on the best ghost towns of Colorado. I got to buy it and spend a little more time up there.
I grew up in Durango, visited Silverton often.
Oh, right. Yeah. I have done that ride through Ouray, and yeah, there's some good stuff. Definitely some good mining stuff. And I've heard of Animus Forks, but I haven't been. I have a friend who lives in Colorado, and he's definitely covered the territory up there.
Kate writes, just a Taiban note, I might have just facilitated the return of the church's baby grand from Texas to Fort Sumner. Fingers crossed. If all goes well, it will soon be in an old bank that a couple I know hopes to turn into an Airbnb.
Oh man. Well, okay, so this is a good time to do this. That would be Kate Nelson from New Mexico Magazine. This is a good time to mention that the Ghost Town issue of New Mexico Magazine has just come out. I think it hit newsstands yesterday. It's a beautiful, beautiful issue with a lot of people contributing. I can see that the setting sun is here in Central Time is crossing my face, but it's a beautiful issue. Kate did a great job pulling a ton of people together to put this issue out. And she's talking about the piano that I believe used to be in the Taiban church, which turned up down in Texas. So I didn't even know that was a thing. So it's incredible. And there are stories like this where, you find out that, someone somewhere, like I think the depot from Yeso is actually on a ranch in Corona, near Corona maybe, and someone just said, hey, we got the depot on our ranch. Like, wow, that's incredible. So this stuff is out there. It's not all lost to the mists of time.
Question from my wife, Marie. We've noticed fruit trees and lilacs in places with no buildings. Have you made this observation?
I have, but actually more in Minnesota. And I think that is, I think the implication is that, this is maybe where a farmstead was, where somebody had planted some fruit trees for their own use. And maybe the house is totally gone. Maybe there's no sign of anybody being there, but these trees remain, which is really evocative and pretty fascinating. So I do think that in a lot of cases, those trees are signs that someone lived there.
Phil asks, where are the petroglyphs that you showed?
I didn't put a location on that because the other part of this, and this is a good time to talk about this, is I do feel a little conflicted. I want people to visit these places. I want people to feel, what I feel. and to share it with people. But I do realize that in the days of the internet, having a lot of people coming through these places is really, it's a fine line to walk. And I think that a lot of them are so remote, and I think that a lot of them are so out of the way that the people that go there are going to be respectful, and they're going there because they want to see these places. But I do sort of err on the side of caution sometimes, which is to say, you can find those petroglyphs. I recommend going on the hunt.
It's so funny. My brother just found some petroglyphs in some BLM land behind his house, and he's been very reluctant to share anyone how to get there.
Yeah.
It's been a conversation lately.
Yeah, I will say that petroglyph hunting is also a real joy of mine. Like just going out and walking around. That's how we found that. I mean, it's on an area you can get to if you're out hunting. But yeah, you'll see all kinds of great stuff if you're out looking for petroglyphs.
All right, so I have a couple more questions before we wrap up. First, for all the librarians out there, have you ever found an abandoned library?
I have not, and coincidentally, I just learned today that I believe the Clayton library is actually on the endangered structures list. It's a beautiful little library. It's not a library right now. Clayton obviously is not a ghost town on the level that you could say this is abandoned. I believe the city owns it. But it's a beautiful little library. So hopefully they're able to restore it. I have found an abandoned bookstore along Route 66. That was interesting with all the books inside. So yeah, I have found a lot of books in various places, in houses and barns and things like that. I did notice that somebody mentioned that GPS has led a lot of people to be able to easily find places. So using film gets me around the GPS tags.
Okay, so what is your favorite abandoned site that you visited?
I think it's really the Taiban church and also the Albuquerque rail yards. Those two places are extremely, I don't know, you can feel the past in both those places. You can almost hear it. Negra is another one on Highway 60. There's a homestead there that is just on a little rise on the plains, and there's farm implements and things like that. And it's just a nice place to be. It's really, really peaceful. Shall I show the last slide here?
Yeah.
This is another one. I can't tell you where this is.
Okay. And while you show that, will you share with us why it was important for you to create this book and what you hope readers take away from Abandoned New Mexico?
I think it was important to document some of the places that you don't hear about, that maybe don't show up in Varney's book, like Kazi. A lot of the places out east, like Pep. I've gotten a lot of response from that area, people that are really interested in having a book that covers places like House. Some of those places are sort of forgotten. It's fun to talk about Lake Valley and Mogollon and places like that, but I think that the Eastern Plains, the Llano Estacado, doesn't quite get the love that it deserves. Somebody did ask me why there's not much on southeastern New Mexico in the book, and extreme southeastern New Mexico. That's really true. Like the Hobbs area, I didn't cover that very much. I would love to. Varney doesn't do anything in that area either. Once I got south of like Milnes, of Highway, kind of in the Milnes Sand area, I kind of stopped going. But I have some stuff. I have quite a backlog of material I could mine to do a volume 2, and some of it would maybe be more in that area. There is some stuff down there, but that's hot, rugged country, and maybe maybe it just was a little out of my circles for when I was making the bulk of this book. The other thing is I included a lot of the words of people that contacted me. So there are stories that you wouldn't get in other places. And I wanted to document Judith Bowers, who did the piece on, who wrote about Centerpoint and her mom being the teacher. She sadly passed away recently, as did her brother, who knew those stories as well. So those stories are being lost pretty quickly here as we're, 50, 60 years out from some of these places becoming ghost towns. And so this slide is another place that I can't mention. I just wanted to say that this bowl is still out there. I didn't obviously take this. And when you're in ghost towns, the idea is just to take the photos. But New Mexico has just an incredible history. And to find something like this, I'd never found an intact bowl like that. It was stunning to me. But it's also stunning, to me to be at like the Taiban church. I find it all sort of one just big adventure to go and see what's out there. So this is my email up at the top, jmhouse@cityofdust. I probably should have, when I came up with that, should have thought of something different because everybody thinks I'm Jim House, but it's jmhouse. I have the blog has been a little inactive, the City of Dust blog. And I have the Facebook page, which is more active at the time for the time being. And then if you want to buy a book directly from me, I'm happy to sign them and include a little 4x6 photo or something as some value added. But that's all the photos I have. We can keep going longer. I got nowhere to go.
Thank you so much. That's so awesome of you. So if they email you, you'll arrange a signed copy.
If they just want to chat, that's fine too. There's
Yeah.
no purchase required.
Awesome. That's so cool. Thanks, John. You guys can also check out Abandoned New Mexico, Ghost Towns, Endangered Architecture and Hidden History from the Public Library. And I'm certain you can find it from our local bookstores as well. Thank you a million times, John. This was awesome and informative, and I now want to go out petroglyph and ghost town hunting. I'm sure others are inspired as well. Let's see. Yeah, just in our Q&A, we have thank yous. Samoa says, I read your book and enjoyed it immensely. Thank you. Will there be a Spanish translation, John?
If someone would like to do a Spanish translation, I would love that. My Spanish is not going to cut it, but if there's anybody out there that wants to take on something like that, I would be more than happy to facilitate that with the publisher if possible.
Awesome, thank you. Well, if no one has any other questions, we are getting lots of thank yous, John. Very much appreciated.
Thanks to everybody for coming. I know that now with vaccines and stuff, people are probably wanting to be outside and exploring a little bit. So I thank everybody for doing the Zoom again.
Yeah, thank you. And you've inspired us to go outside for sure.
Yeah, well, great. And thank you as well. And thanks to the Santa Fe Public Library. We set this up a long time ago, I think. So this is great to have it come to fruition. Yeah,
thank you. Everyone stay safe, be well, go ghost town hunting, but with respect to those who still live there. All my best, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.